tonight. I slept through the natural light, but I'll do it if it feels alright. Alright, alright,
Hello and welcome to the Central Coast Poetry Shows, and I'm your host, Jim Russo. My reason for producing the show is this. For about 10 years, I've been reading and attending poetry readings all over California's Central Coast. And I've had the privilege during that time of hearing and seeing some very talented poets read their own words. This show is to be a platform for those poets to be seen and heard by you. Tonight's guest is Sally Ashton. Sally is the author of Some Odd Afternoon. Her name is Juanita, and These Metallic Days. Her fourth collection, The Behavior of Clocks on a Rotating Body of Reference, is forthcoming in February of 2019 from Word Farm Press. She's also assistant editor of They Said, a multi-genre anthology of contemporary collaborative writing, just released in 2018 from Black Lawrence Press. Sally's honors include a fellowship from Art Council Silicon Valley and a Montalvo Artist Residency Fellowship, and she served as the second Santa Clara County Poet Laureate from 2011 to 2013. She's earned her MFA at Bennington Writing Seminars and currently teaches at San Jose State University through private workshops and a variety of writers' conferences. She has been editor-in-chief of DMQ Review, an online journal of poetry and arts, since 2003. As a poet and writer, Sally has also published flash fiction and lyric essays, as well as articles and reviews. She's a busy girl. And I'd like to introduce you to Sally Ashton. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. It's great to be here, especially on your one-year anniversary.
Our one-year anniversary. We've been doing this for a year.
Thank you for the honor of enjoying that day with you all.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Now, I wanted you to talk about your new book that's coming out with that long title that I just read.
That's right. It is a long title. And that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of not only putting together a book, but also how you bring a variety of poems together. So the title, again, is The Behavior of Clocks on a Rotating Body of Reference. Good God, what does that mean? The poems that are in the book, I'd been writing for a while, and my experience with writing a book or having a book of poems is I'm not planning on writing a book of poems, I'm just writing poetry. And at a certain point you think, oh, I've got a lot, let's see what I can draw them together with. So that was one thing that was happening. And then I was at a seminar over in San Jose, and one of the, up on the screen, the presenter put a picture of Albert Einstein playing the violin. I don't recall exactly what he said about it. It was a conference about creativity. And so I think he must have said, did you realize that Albert Einstein was an avid violinist, and he would quite often pick up the violin when he was stumped over some of his equations or whatever. And it was a combination of the idea of the creativity of Einstein with something like the violin, as well as the picture. It's you could Google it online if you wanted to see it, that really captured my imagination. So I thought, I've got to write about this. But I don't know anything about Einstein, nothing about relativity, the theory of relativity that he's so famous for. But a friend of mine who is a physicist, Stefan Kreshel-Moller, who's married to a poet, suggested I pick up this book, Relativity, the Special and General Theory. It's written by Albert Einstein for the novice who knows nothing about physics, can't even say it. And so began my kind of love affair with relativity. And I'm always in awe of the cosmos and all of the things that get delivered via the Hubble telescope, of space and the birth of stars. And so just all of this burgeoned and came about that I began to write a group of poems along those lines. And so when I came to pulling the book together, this became the kind of through line, these poems sort of in regards to Einstein and the theory of relativity from a very novice perspective. I just have to say, I can barely remember the title's name, let alone much about the theory of relativity.
You know more now than you did before.
I sure did. And that's what I love about being a poet, is not only being paying attention to the natural world and to relationships between people and what people say and do, but just these larger concepts that are swirling around. And being able to take these kind of out of the blue ideas seemingly and then become sort of more or less obsessive. For instance, I've written a whole chapbook on donkeys, so I have the ability to become very obsessed.
To really zero in.
Yeah. So in the book, Einstein uses metaphors to explain things about relativity, and a couple of them have to do with clocks, and the other has to do with trains. And he talks about he describes the process of dropping a stone out the window when you're sitting in a train, and how you see it go straight down and how someone else would see it curve, and how that can begin to be an entry for the more basic mind into the idea of relativity, that your position in relative to space and motion influences how you see
your
things.
Observation.
Yeah. So one of the titles in his book is The Behavior of Clocks on a Rotating Body of Reference. So I was for a while just calling it Behavior of Clocks, but I thought that the rotating body of reference has a great, I'm on a rotating body of reference, the Earth. I'm in the midst of a rotating cycles of life. So I like the metaphors that Einstein uses himself for very complex things.
Yeah.
So.
Fascinating.
Well, it is. It has been for me. You probably, if you ever read the book, you'd go, what was she talking about?
I have to share a little story very quickly. I don't want to take your time, but when I lived in LA as an actor, a good friend of mine was a physics professor at USC, where I was studying, and we became good friends. And he used to, at night, we'd have a few beers at my place, and he would go over his lecture that he gave that day. And I was right on it. I was listening and attentive and asking questions. He says, I wish my students were this involved.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You know,
the hard part for me is retaining it, because I don't have the context of a mind of a physicist.
Or physicist.
Yeah, I was going to say physician, no, physicist.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's fascinating. The world is a fascinating place.
Oh, it really is. It really is. Well, to get off on another subject for a while, I asked this of all my guests. Of all the poems you've written, do you have a favorite?
So I would answer for this setting and for today that I have the poem Einstein's Violin that came out of that picture that I think is, it's a favorite because I think it helped me find a way into writing this collection.
Cool. Well, I'm going to ask you to read that poem first, if you would, and step to the podium and then give us some more.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sally Ashton.
So the first poem I'll read is Einstein's Violin. He tucks it under his chin, raises bow to string, the fingerboard running straight from cheek into the palm of his cupped left hand. Cochlea, clavicle, each fingertip curved, some for the balance of the bow, others poised on the strings. So much curled into the minute before music begins. He cocks an eyebrow toward the music stand, finds his place in the lines and spaces. The intervals of sound, like distance and time, paused. He scans the pattern of notes, the signature, the notation, a specific gravity. Down bow, and the universe moving in one direction feels the pull in another. Sound expands, reverberates, notes improvising some rhapsody. Harmonies he hears the way he sees the nature of energy, vibrating. He taps his foot, keeping time. So this next piece is also from the new collection. I'll read a few from The Behavior of Clocks on a Rotating Body of Reference. And this is I think interestingly, I actually published it as flash fiction. So I do write a lot of these short pieces that I think kind of go either way. So maybe you'll hear more of a story in this one. A Theory of Relativity. I stand at the window of a railway carriage, Albert Einstein. Across from me on a train, Albert sat facing backwards, a little table between us, his forehead pressed against the glass. His eyes flickered as if to count passing fence posts. At length, he reached a small notebook from a chest pocket, placed it on the table, jotted something down. I tried not to stare, but couldn't make out what he wrote even when I did. He smiled. "May I trade seats with you for a while, my dear?" What could I say? In spite of my motion sickness, I agreed. For one, the train traveled a relatively straight path. Plus, his eyes were so kind and sad. He steadied my elbow until I was seated, took his seat, turned again to the window, again to his notes. Then I watched as he had, the landscape recede. What I knew blurred in immeasurable distance. The sky lost light. Albert's white head bobbed. And just before I slept, a luminescent clock appeared in the sky, though now I see it was the moon itself wearing a clock face that watched us speed by. Or did we too appear to be standing completely still? The Age of Information. Dusk. Crickets kick in. A frog chorus rises from the creek. Crows have the last word here, and everything finds its place. Time's sweet airs fade forward into the immense, or lost planets drift through the Milky Way. We search for them by way of Einstein, by way of desire. We are familiar with dark matter, but vexed by some myth of eternity. What is 14 billion years? Far out from the edge of evening and our planet's own bending light, a satellite courses. Weightless men consider Mars. We have never seen so much. We have never been so alone. We have never known so little. It's not really so bad. But when I flew to the moon, it was in a silver Studebaker, the steering wheel like Jupiter's ring, as round as any planet, comet streak, constellations, dials, and gauges spun so fast it was like standing still. Stars whirled past the windshield. I wasn't looking when I saw such things. The sounds I made I cannot make now. I have forgotten how, which is why I think the moon never gets closer than it did then. I knelt on the front seat, holding on to the steering wheel, and flew. So now I'll read some other favorites from a couple of my books, and the first from my book, These Metallic Days, is called Sometimes Lightning. Sometimes lightning misfires. Instead of disappearing into open sky, it flings itself against the earth, strikes the ground in a concussion of elements that melts sand and rock as it courses downward, vitrifies the soil, and cleaves a path tunneled in tubes of glass. Fulgurites, the form of lightning captured into what you can hold, energy seared and palpable, encrusted with fused sand. Once my father sat alone in a barn, a small boy with his lantern, enclosed by night and the company of horses. He told me this when I myself was small, how the barn's ancient timbers lifted the darkness above him, and the lantern's flames spilled light through the glass chimney, shaping the shadows and an awareness he suddenly knew he would remember complete for the rest of his life, as if an instant were an object he could handle and admire, and hand to me so many years later, child to child. No one knows why a moment, a bolt of lightning, leaps from its destined course toward forgottenness and encases itself, a memory we carry our whole life, while others, perhaps as remarkable, disappear in the blank sky of history without notice. My father was a man changed. No, it was nothing distinct, nothing anyone could recognize. But inside him, like the hollow hardness in the fulgurite, a place he could find, the rapture of a moment retained. The world is on fire all around us. Sometimes we glimpse it. My father is dead, the barn torn down, but I remember his eyes alight, witness to when fire enters secret places, brands us for its own. Glass darkly. On the simplest of days, when you ride in silence with a friend in his car along the coastal route, or the landscape passes beyond your window, gray bands of brush, field, sea, fog, and a sudden flock of birds leaps as one body into the air, crosses the road, swerves into another direction, a flash of light across countless winged bodies, then veers in shades again. What makes the spirit soar to meet them? An interval of freedom from the body's bounds, and though you ride on, retain for some brief time the loftiness of wings? There must remain in us a remembrance of former things, that like a sparrow at a window sees his image, flies to the glass, again and again. And one more swept from corners. Dead bees crunch underfoot like leaves of paper, faint scent of honey. Bodies curled, their amber darkened. Curious and wonderful to live while others go on dying. Bees mingled with dirt in a dustpan. I dump them out, cut roses for the vase, write the following sentence. Okay. This is a book called Some Odd Afternoon. I feel like that sums up poetry. What often catches my attention are the odd moments of life, but what doesn't seem odd? Existence is odd. Christ. Christ returned there in the middle of 6th Avenue at West 54th in front of the New York Hilton. She stood in the intersection, right in traffic, and tried to flag down a taxi. God decided to send the daughter this time. She stood with her arm raised, unperturbed by the rush of cars on either side or the cacophony of horns that blared rapid fire. No one stopped. I passed her on my way to O'Brien's and almost said, "Christ, get out of the street. Are you crazy or something?" But it wasn't my business, and maybe she was for all I knew. I guess it was some sort of miracle. She had that "let me kiss you where it hurts" look on her face, but she was headed in the wrong direction, and I had friends waiting for me. No one seemed to recognize her or care if they did, and no way a cab was going to stop there, right in the middle of traffic. Christ, I thought. From the pub, I heard a fresh blast of horns when the light changed. I hoped she got where she needed to go and had somewhere to sleep that night, someone expecting her. And I was honestly glad to think she'd come back. Lately, things had been feeling pretty messed up. Perched on a stool with my pals, I lifted a glass to her and thought, well, get busy then. Down my drink, and for a moment, as it was if I was skating, December in Central Park, one of the only people on the ice, snow just beginning to spin. I've done a lot of event planning. I've worked with Poetry Center San Jose, and one of the things that when you're a host of a famous poet is that you get to meet them at the airport and maybe have a meal with them and keep them busy or get them to the hotel before the event that night. So this poem is called Lunch with the Famous Poet. And after we'd finished the bread, the wine, the plates of ravioli and brown butter sage sauce, and I had smiled through his stories, and he'd politely answered my questions about getting published. He didn't like my manuscript's title. There was a strange pause before he asked, carefully, whether there was a Foot Locker shoe store in town. And I'd answered carefully, yes, and he'd explained how a cat at the house where he'd stayed the night before flying here had peed in his shoes, his only pair, and I'd understood he was wearing them right then. They were under our table near mine, so I agreed to take him shopping before the reading to Foot Locker, where he chose optic white athletic shoes to wear with his brown pants and dim rumpled jacket. I did point out a dark pair, but no, he preferred white, though he said he wasn't quite sure whether these fit right, and then stood as my sons once stood, hands hanging, staring at his feet. So, what else but to kneel and press my practice thumb into the toe of the new size 13.5 shoe he would wear on stage later that night. After that, I knew I'd learned a lot about poets and the art of the business. I did change my manuscript's title, which I've just remembered was called Don't Look Down. He'd said it made him want to look down. And I. Highway 1 cut straight across farmland, tied in place by rows of artichoke plants, and I knew something was going to happen by the fields waited. But only a small rise in the road and a row of pelicans flew over like single notes played on the piano. One rise led to another, and just before the sea, the 100,000 flipped on the odometer, the zeros lined up like a jackpot. The Beatles were playing, and I pulled over on gravel, jumped out, kissed the hood, whooped twice, hands raised, and got back in driving. The sea on my right spun sunlight, and I know it was bad. I texted my son, but he sent right back. A seabird rode an updraft, who could name it? Kelp beds swayed on one side, on the other, a Hereford with a muddied face looked up, and I took a bite from the apple I'd packed. The ocean called up all its blue, wave, wave, and I couldn't look over my shoulder. I was driving. There was no stopping, everything turning. The road, the CD, the astonished odometer. I've had the privilege of co-hosting an annual Valentine's Day reading in San Jose with Nils Peterson, who I believe has been on the show before, a great voice and patriarch of poetry. He'd probably hate me for saying that. Patriarch for poetry in San Jose. And I wrote this poem for this Valentine's Day. Let's get rid of Valentine's Day and replace it with second Halloween. You know an idea's hot when it has 126,876 Facebook likes before you've even seen it, and it's only mid-January. Already thousands are dreading the day in spite of those yummy conversation hearts and gummy bears that spill from aisle caps in every store, making their appearance in my CVS December 26th, along with hearts pierced by arrows, which is possibly one of the reasons many of us would rather bring back the Halloween displays, witches, spiders and monsters, the bloody fingers and mummies, axe murderers and vampires, zombies and ghosts, even the French maids or sexy costumes for men, which unfortunately are more ludicrous than sexy, my favorite, however, being the golden dong, Google it, which seems to bring us somewhat back around to the problem with Valentine's Day and why many of us would prefer to apply fake scars and warts rather than face the sickly array of red satin lace and roses, the profit-driven reminder to get it on. What's the point of a holiday that excludes nearly half of us?
those who, for whatever reason, identified as single on the last county census, though many chose single over the only other choice, married, so who knows what really goes on behind closed doors. But Halloween is all about opening doors and giving away something sweet to whoever is standing there, no matter what they look like or who they are, perfect strangers. And all anyone has to do is hold out a bag and ask. I'm going to read a couple from the Donkey Book, and if I can find it. So it all started when I heard a donkey in my neighborhood. And I live in a place where you would not expect there to be a donkey braying. And so began an obsession with an imaginative world of donkeys that you hear but can't see. Began again researching donkeys, and donkeys everywhere. Belief. To prevent catching the measles, place the child on the donkey's back. She must face the donkey's tail. That's right, sit her backwards. Pluck 3 hairs from the donkey's tail, from the little broom at the end. Hold on to the child in case the donkey starts or bucks. Try to stay clear. Avoid being kicked. Lost my place. Avoid being kicked. Perhaps someone else should help. Put the 3 donkey tail hairs into some small bag on a string. This bag goes around the child's neck. Do you have a thistle? Yes, you must have a thistle. Go find one. I think a thistle is a thistle. Next, hold the thistle over the child's head while she sits backward on the donkey, facing the tail, and wears the small bag on a string around her neck into which you've put the 3 freshly plucked tail hairs. All set? Now make the donkey go. Easy, the donkey must carry the child back and forth 9 times. Keep the thistle over her head. 9 times, 3 hairs, 1 thistle, a donkey, a child, no measles. This is the truth. How blessed are you who, not seeing, believe. Don't ask me chicken pox. So that's true. That's a belief somewhere that if you want to prevent measles, that's all it takes. Okay. 4th of Juanita. Juanita is July. Juanita is the donkey's name. Juanita is July. Of course she is. Heat and unridable breeze. The burn begins when you swing your legs out of bed, walk barefoot across wooden floor to the open window. A smell of fresh tar and creosote. Flags fail to flap. She is a memory to fondle, a token in my pocket, a ring on a chain around my neck. Or did I only imagine? Do I? Apt. Each firework always bigger than the last, louder, choreographed to music and passion swell. Incendiary spray of purple, green, the surprise of golden meteors pause, drop like molten wax. Cool to cinder, you flick from your arm. You wait for the next explosion. The mind's eye widens in recollection, a night to remember, one like no other. Such spectacles can't be trusted. However, they are all I have. Like a donkey, I follow in the tracks worn before me. What has been traveled, what will be traveled again and again. July the exception. Fireflies, firework grand finale, every constellation undiminished, wavers some promise overhead. So the speaker of this book only wants to hear the donkey again, become obsessed with it. And so that's all from her. Follow the tail lights. Trees close in. Billboards announce the next fast food stops. Half-empty parking lots, peaches, plums for sale, regimented corn. A hermit barn crouches, sorghum tassels gleam. An oak's long shadow follows profound textures of change. What will stand? What turns under? The heron's black feet trail, rudder it over the freeway, a rest stop, a rice field. Its white wings beat slow, the way a woman fans herself in church. Pews full of alfalfa. I don't pull over, the road irresistible. The windows for once rolled down all the way. Part of the reason I wrote that poem is because I had a teacher who said, you can never put sorghum in a poem. Oh yes, I can. Sorghum. It's all about sorghum. How to wind a watch. First, you must. Do not be afraid to assist. Take it in your hands, a little wheel for turning pinched. Finger and thumb. The pitch and yaw, a simple, obsolete technology you will never forget. The wheel is on a stem. The stem cannot be plucked. Pull and move the hands of time. It is not absolute, you must remember. Motion affects the intervals. Go back in time. Manipulate its mechanics. Hand is the root of manipulate. Hand me the watch. I'll do it. Gratitude. The woman woke from her nap. A breeze tossed through the greeny branches overhead. Some bird wheedled in a way that matched the motion of the wind, the leaves. A stem of grass teased her bare ankle. The dry air buzzed. In one direction, vineyard unfurled, rising, falling with the hills. In the other, the steeple and tiled roofs of some small town stood almost asleep. She didn't want to move either. It occurred to her then, it was a good thing that dinosaurs were extinct. They would have ruined everything. Late afternoon sonata. Light shifts lower through the trees, and the piano begins to apologize, to explain that what happens is simply the way life goes, and so is right. A pair of geese calls, wings overhead. The end of August, a slow departure, marked by stillness, the sky white, even as leaves flush. The piano reminds us of the good we desire. In another city, my mother goes to sleep in a room she does not desire, the same light fingering her window. The piano reckons note by note how season follows season, even if we want to stand completely still, even if we don't want the day to end. The earth turns. How melancholy this music. How brave each silence.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Sally Ashton. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, that's it for tonight. I want to thank you for finding us here at Central Coast Poetry Shows. My name is Jim Russo. Thank you for following us. And remember, words are free. Use them.
I'm beating up the street tonight.